Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be able to continue our discussion series on a new way of thinking, a new meta-paradigm, a new paradigm in terms of thinking about the world. This is based on some intense work that I, Dr. Werner Neppi, and my colleague, Dr. Ed Close, physicist and mathematician, have done. Today we're going to talk about the scientific method.
Scientific information can always be tested. This is the Popperian view, the view deriving from Karl Popper. It's an axiom. He never proved this piece of scientific information, that it is falsifiable, that it can be made false by testing. And this works very well, ladies and gentlemen. Works 95% of the time, 98% of the time. When you do research, you can get consistent data. And that's called falsifiability of data in scientific research. It's very, very useful. But sometimes there are areas that cannot be falsified. The classic example is evolution. How do we go back billions of years to decide, well, you know, we can prove this? So we have to look at little bits of data. We have to look at the feasibility in this 3S1T fabric that we are experiencing. Does it contradict? Does it fill and fit the whole fabric of what we want? That's one example. Another example is in physics, in subatomic physics. There's a very complex area called entanglement, where effectively one particle, which is separated from another particle, talks to it. It's like there is a communication that is occurring. We call it non-local. It seems to be outside space and time, but it's outside this 3S1T. It's very difficult to prove by falsifiability, because how do you falsify something when you cannot necessarily get this kind of data occurring? Again, you have to look at your little pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and this is what we call feasibility. So the topic we're talking about today is falsifiability and feasibility, a new model. Very important, relevant. So we have feasibility in evolution, we have feasibility in entanglement, and another area where we need to look at these little pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, because you're going much, much higher in terms of dimensions potentially, is the area psi research. And when we talk about parapsychological research, we're talking about rather amazing things like precognition, foreknowledge. How does this get explained with this one point in time? Or, alternatively, if there is such a thing as survival of some aspect of the human personality after bodily death, how does this get explained? Because of this, in order to develop this special model, which goes by a rather complex name, we call it TDVP. It stands for, wait for it, Triadic Dimensional Distinction Vortical Paradigm. Triadic just refers to the triad of space, time, and consciousness, but it's the broadest kind of consciousness, so we call it a C matrix. Dimensional talks about the fact that we're talking about multiple dimensions beyond 3 dimensions of space and 1 point in time. Distinction, we use a mathematical technique developed by Dr. Close called the calculus of distinctions, so we can distinguish various parts, for example, of these dimensions and various variables, even consciousness variables like truth and love and wisdom and honesty. All of these you can measure a little bit of love, a lot bit of love. In other words, there is an ordinal component in that mathematical metric measure. And all of these are very, very difficult. Survival, precognition, so-called telepathy. To measure, to keep falsifying, to replicate, because the situation is different every single time. There are little subtleties, the person's attitude, the experimenter's attitude, the situation even in terms of time and space. And because of it, we've got to look at feasibility. And so we introduced this idea of LFAF, lower dimensional feasibility, absent falsification. Just to complete this TDVP, the V stands for vortex. A vortex? Isn't that some kind of shape like the water going out a bathroom plug? Or like a tornado? Yeah, well, this is one kind of vortex. It can expand outwards. But then there you get little helices, which might be the same size all the way through. Or you can get something which becomes very elongated, gradually elongated. Or it can expand into a balloon in the middle like a sphere. All of these are different kinds of vortices. And what we found, and we can show this mathematically, is it's ubiquitous. It's around in every area of scientific endeavor. In the physical sciences, for example, even electrons rotating. In the astronomical sciences, in terms of the universe and the various planets going around the sun, for example. We have movement occurring even in the context of meteorology in terms of winds and in terms of DNA structure, the double helix, for example. This is ubiquitous, and it's ubiquitous across various sciences. And so we look at the vortex as something that is highly relevant.
Importantly, these vortices, such as the tornado and the double helix, and what is ubiquitous in nature, is not only reflecting 3S1T, 3 dimensions of space, 1 point in time. It is reflecting a multi-dimensional framework whereby there is a communication method across dimensions, between dimensions, and within dimensions. And these are these vortices that meet up with zillions of other vortices. Remarkable phenomenon. But strangely enough, it fits within the mathematics. It is, in other words, feasible at that 3S1T level.
And then finally, we have all of this put together where our current ideas, our current scientific endeavors don't fit. We have to look at new ways of approaching the scientific endeavors.
We wrote this book. Reality begins with consciousness, a paradigm shift that works, to show that, in fact, we can combine these features, including the dimensions that we spoke about, and the consciousness, and the vortices, into a whole new meta-paradigm, broader than a paradigm itself, into a whole new meta-paradigm, which we've called Triadic Dimensional Distinction Vortical Paradigm, TDVP. So this is all described in Reality Begins with Consciousness, and it's all linked up with these ideas of science requires some kind of proof. It's very nice falsifying, but we cannot always falsify. So we've got to look at feasibility. And this introduction of feasibility as well produced the idea of lower dimensional feasibility, absent falsification. In other words, it's feasible at those lower dimensions, at 3s1t generally, and it's not been falsified. It's feasible, so likely, or very possible, logical, based on the little pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, but has not been falsified. LFAF, described in our book, Reality Begins with Consciousness, a book co-authored by Dr. Edward Close, whom we discussed, developed the calculus of distinctions, which we have further amplified in our several editions. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to describe to you a rather complex but very important topic, LFAF, lower dimensional feasibility, absent falsification, and how it can be applied in TDVP as part of the book Reality Begins with Consciousness.